Hey, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Priorities on Purpose. Listen, today we are going to be continuing our conversation with Michele Vrabel, the author of Butterfly Stitches. And I am telling you, if you haven't yet listened to part one, you're going to want to go back to do that. We have talked about a lot of things. Heads up, this is an episode not for children. In my opinion, strongly advise you not to let children listen. I think for the older kids or teens that have been through some things, have been exposed to things that they should not have been exposed to, listen to it yourself and then make that decision if you think that it would be helpful for them. I'm going to tell you that by this time in this episode, I can't remember if it's this one or the first one, we talk about abortion. We talk about sexual abuse. We talk about forgiveness and unforgiveness. And this episode specifically, it went in a completely different direction than I intended. And I want you to know that the whole entire day leading up to this interview, I felt like I needed extra prayer. I had reached out to people and was like, hey, I need you to pray. And I didn't know what that was about, but I now know it's because this episode, I lean into where I felt like God wanted us to go. And I speak about things publicly that I have never spoke about publicly. And honestly, a lot of the things that I talk about is saying out loud the things that have the potential to hold us back. And this episode, I talk about the one thing, this thing that has triggered me for a long time. And as I've talked to God about it, I've recognized what I thought was the reason I was triggered, related to my trauma, actually isn't the case at all. I'm triggered because this shame continues to attach itself to me. And I'm currently in a fast. So this is day 3 or day 4 of this fast. And sometimes when, these are things that I don't have, fasting is not something I'm I consider myself very knowledgeable. I do this all the time. It's not something I do all the time. It's not something I talk about. It's not something I literally just feel led by God and, I'm doing it. And so with that being said, another area that, gosh, I feel like I'm going all over the place with this. Okay, we're just going to get into this episode. I'm not even going to talk about deliverance because I do feel like sometimes when shame is attached, this whole nother episode, I think fasting is necessary. And that wasn't intentionally going to come out of my mouth right now. But again, I am leaning in to say the things I feel God leading me to say. And so I want to tell you right now ahead in the intro of this episode that if there is shame that comes up for you in the middle of this episode or when you're listening to the second part, I want you to know that fasting may be necessary for you. And so, reach out to someone who understands fasting, because I do think that sometimes, for me, what I've learned about fasting is it's about dying to myself and being humble enough to cling to Jesus in the moments when I just want to comfort myself, especially with food, as someone who has struggled with sexual abuse, who has struggled with lots of this trauma. And again, I speak out loud this moment in this episode where the enemy has told me these lies, and saying it out loud releases that power that the enemy has over us. And so I didn't want to go there in this episode. I would never intentionally say this out loud on my own. And to share this publicly is extremely uncomfortable for me, because the fear is that I will be exposed and rejected and people won't like me because of this thing I did when I was little. And so again, I'm now publishing this episode and you're listening to me share and expose the shame that I have been carrying and feeling. And, again, like it's an extremely powerful episode. I clearly am not releasing this episode for myself. I am releasing this episode because I know somebody listening to this episode is going to be set free, because I'm not the only one that struggles with holding on to the shame, holding on to the unforgiveness for myself, like my own, forgiving other people has not always been easy for me. But forgiving myself is something that I think I continue to battle with. And if you listen to the first part of this, I think we've already talked about how forgiveness isn't just a one-time thing. It's a process. Forgiving is a verb. It's not an event. So you don't just forgive this situation one time. Like, things will come up in our mind and we'll have to intentionally make a decision to forgive again and again for the same things. And so again, I preface this episode, I feel like I've given you way too much, but I want you to know, like, this episode has the power to set people free. Share it with those that you know. And again, like, my potential shame, the things that, like, my biggest insecurity ever, like this thing that has been this underlying fear for me, like, I say it out loud in this episode. And even then, I'm telling you, share this episode. This episode is going to set people free, because when I say the words of the thing that haunts me and terrifies me, other people who are experiencing the same thing, they're going to be able to say, me too. She literally just took the words out of my head. Maybe things that have been below the surface that you never even knew was an issue for you. Because sometimes, like, I didn't know that this was an issue. I thought it was something totally different until I really took some time to sit with God in it, and he revealed this to me. And so again, listen to this episode. I would not let children or teenagers even, like, I don't know. It's very sensitive topic. And I would say, listen yourself and then make the decision. So again, without further ado, let's get into this episode where we just pick up where we left off. And again, like, right before we start this part, I want you to know, like, I literally in the middle of the recording, like, paused, like, I feel like I'm going somewhere that I did not intend to go. And I need to know if you have time, because I'm going to lean into this, but it's going to be a lot. And she's like, wow, okay, let's go. So again, I hope it blesses you, because it was a lot. And I feel like I have a hangover. Today, as I'm recording this intro, is the day after this interview, because this was the last interview that I did yesterday. And I'm pretty sure I just needed to go to bed after it, because saying the things out loud that I said was an undoing for me and it was like running a marathon. So anyways, here's part 2. Hey there, I'm Melissa Batt, the host of Priorities on Purpose, a podcast for overwhelmed women who are tired of going through the motions. You know there has to be more to this life than the cycle of numbing out, scrolling social media, exhausting yourself with a never-ending to-do list, and still feeling like a failure at the end of the day. You have hope that tomorrow will be different, and I'm here to help you make sure that it actually is. I'm a Christian life coach, and on this podcast, we talk all about intentional living, mental health struggles, and tangible ways to be the best versions of ourselves with Jesus at the center. I promise to be your hype girl and biggest cheerleader as I share simple strategies to help you get out of your rut, eliminate distractions, and live the life you are created for. Are you ready to go beyond existing and learn how to truly live? Put your earbuds in and let's get to it, friend. We're going to talk about unforgiveness. And I think that I'm just going to say this is going to come out, and I don't think I've said this out loud to anyone. This is just me and Jesus talking. And so I this is probably, I don't know what I'm doing with this information, but here it is about to go out loud. I feel like God's going to do something with it. And I just trust that. I'm honored. So one of the reasons why I feel like it was easy for me to forgive him is because I recognized, and I think so in the sexual abuse that I experienced, I was young and I don't know all the details, but I do remember that my sisters and I would make out, and I'm the oldest. And so I've always kind of blamed myself. And for a long time, I felt very uncomfortable with my children. Like, I knew it was not okay for them. And I watched like a hawk to make sure that didn't happen. But I also did not fully understand that was something that my sisters, it's almost like there was a block there. Until one day I got brave enough and asked my therapist, is this normal? Because I recognized that I don't want my kids making out. I knew it wasn't normal, but I knew that as a child, my siblings and we made out. And, we were young, and I have since, part of what I needed to do is I needed to go to my sisters and say, I recognize this happened. And, that was so scary because I had to ask them for forgiveness and acknowledge it. And that's something that I definitely never, I would rather pretend it didn't happen. Sure. And so as, this was 2020, this was part of the reason, the battle of when I had that dream and, saw this man, saying, oh yeah, you really want to go down this. I was like, yeah, bring it on. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to have courage, and I'm going to stand with God, and I'm going to have every uncomfortable conversation that is necessary to move forward, not only for me, but for others as well. And so, having the conversations with my sisters and having to say, I don't know exactly what happened. I don't want to know. Do you remember anything? And also, I want you to know that, I'm sorry. And the forgiveness, ask for forgiveness. And I have a good relationship with my sisters now. Since then, I think there's still part of me that I can't tell if it is that I struggle with, I get triggered. And this is again, I'm putting pieces together. And this is a piece that when you said this, that just kind of, I'm talking this out. Every time that something is in the news about, this pastor or that pastor or this person, and it's some kind of sexual sin or whatever, I get extremely triggered. And I thought it was because of the sexual abuse of myself, but I think it is more so of this underlying fear that I'm going to be found out, that I'm a fraud. And I'm not a fraud. I know that, but there's this, I think there's still this shame that has been attached to me. Sure. So I don't know why I felt led to say this right now. Again, I was this is way off where I thought we were going. But again, I think it goes back to your story and you having to forgive yourself and that work. Do you have any thoughts? I just want to be quiet for a minute and hear from you and see if you have insight or I don't know, into forgiving yourself or on the story as a whole. Either. Okay. I'm open to receive whatever you want to share. And again, I would love to say this will be a podcast that's I want to talk to my sisters. I'm not afraid to put it in the podcast episode. Honestly, that's kind of my style that I'm very vessel. Yeah, every single time. I wasn't planning on talking about it, but it's been needing to come out. And again, it's about speaking up and exposing what needs to be exposed. And this lie that I'm going to be found out, that someone's going to come and I'm going to find out like maybe there was something else that happened that I don't know of, that I haven't been able to ask forgiveness for, so tell me your thoughts.
Well, I think that there's a couple of things. No one else can determine what you feel like you need to say out loud and what conversations you need to have with other people. My father is alive. And when it came time in my edits to naming names, I don't have to say his name. People can look at my name and figure it out. But the Lord told me very out loud that my father wasn't going to sue me, that this story, my story, was going to be his redemption. That was a real gut punch. Seems wrong because it wasn't negative, but it took my breath away. Okay. So I sat crying with God. I sat crying the rest of the day because I had not said his name out loud. I, as a Christian, had not prayed for him. I had not prayed for any of my abusers. Now the Lord was going to tell me that I have to believe that they deserve the same redemption I deserve. It wasn't a leap for me. It was just a couple of hours of crying mostly because I was like, shame on me for never having done that and never even occurring to me. Okay. So whether you need to say out loud what has been going on for you, that's your story. If that is what is the mechanism that brings you healing with your sisters and even for yourself, even that first and foremost for yourself, because do you want the rest of your life, because of that shame residing, to maybe act in a certain way? Nothing bad, not do anything bad, but act in a certain, like you said, you made a comment that you watch your children like a hawk, as if they're going to somehow pull out of the universe, making out together like you just said. Okay. So I think that if that's your healing, so that doesn't come as some sort of sideswipe on you from some others, I think that's absolutely, there's nothing wrong with that. And that is how you have to, find your peace and get rid of that shame, because shame is not from God.
Absolutely.
It is not from God. And there is nothing you did that should result in that. And I believe that even though I allowed myself to be carried along and make the decision to have an abortion, when I went through that study, that shame that I felt the consequences would be I would lose my daughter, man, eradicating that is not a simple task. I didn't initially want to tell anybody else because I knew there was going to be some judgment. I had stood next to some people at a Bible study, and one of them made a comment about somebody they knew that had an abortion and they were never going to get into heaven. And I was like, oh, that is not even biblical. But it was devastating, and it shut my mouth for a couple more years when the Lord told me, he had me do what you're doing, what you're talking about, but in front of a whole workshop. So I think that, honestly, this out loudness is the beginning of us being able to clarify that this shame did not come from Jesus, and I'm going to get rid of it. And you're going to do battle with it. You're going to extinguish those flaming arrows, because there is no shame. There is no shame from God. You have dealt with this. You've went and talked to your family. And this can be with many things. I think you probably have a few more things from your childhood that you might feel like you want to go. Grandma dying may have cut off at least one avenue of conversation too. I get that you were waiting. And
not because I wanted to, but I knew, it was around that, literally, I think at Thanksgiving, I felt like I was going to have a conversation with her. And I have no doubt, that was a stall from the enemy to, she was diagnosed with throat cancer and some other cancer and literally had to have her voice box removed. I am talking about speaking up, and my grandma has to have surgery to have her voice box removed.
No coincidences.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of different areas, but this, that is something that I, again, it's everything's a process. And you think like, and it's layered. You get through one layer and you're like, oh, I did that. I'm so happy that I'm through that. And then that's like, all right, now we're going to move on to, this next layer that I'm going to have you work on. And so it's this continuous process of molding us into who he wants us to be and who he created us to be before the enemy came and wreaked havoc on everything in the world. And I think how we'll wrap this up is I would love for you to share with us just a message for someone who is struggling to forgive. Maybe they're struggling to forgive themselves, because I think a lot of us, that's the hardest. It was hard for, like, I'm going to do a whole episode on some of the things God walked me through on how to forgive someone who I really prayed and prayed and prayed. I was like, God, help me forgive them. And something else would come up and I'd start all over from being mad. That was a process. But I think this part, for us to forgive ourselves, what would you say to somebody who is really struggling with feeling undeserving, unworthy? They deserve, nothing. God, they don't deserve heaven. They don't deserve God because they're a mess and they've ruined their life or whatever, the stories that they tell themselves. What would you say to that person?
Well, just on the surface, even the churchy answers of course we're not. None of us are worthy. That's why we have Jesus. But when we really stop and think about the forgiveness we've received, it was, yes, Christ did that on the cross. But like I said before, we didn't stop sinning at that juncture. Okay. We didn't stop, being tempted and going through life. So forgiving, in my opinion, and there can be Bible scholars who maybe want to argue with me or whatever, and healing are not a one-time transaction. They, I believe, are verbs. I believe they are ongoing. In the writing of this story, it brought up things about people that I had forgiven long ago, and they were feelings said, were hard. So it was like I had to say, I forgive them again because I was being brought back through it. So I'm not saying don't go through it in order to do the healing because of that, but I'm just saying, I think they're a process. I think that forgiving ourselves is so hard because we feel like we did something to make these things happen to us. That's where the devil comes in with that shame and that whatever. And trying to get past that. Shame is the fulcrum of unworthiness, in my opinion. And if any part of us feels like we had a part to play, or the fact that we maybe didn't speak out. I didn't speak out about the sexual abuse that was happening to me at 5 years old, and 2 other cousins were having it happen to them too. Now, they were older. I'm not saying that means they should have spoke out. They were the ones who eventually did. But in the looking back, this would put me in the space of the person you're talking about, where I feel if I had spoken up, what could have happened? So just like what you're saying, if we don't speak out about what's happening, then how many more people are going to stay quiet and suppressed, and the generational stuff or even new stuff is just going to continue because we're afraid to say, because of that, we're letting that shame have a foothold. I wish that there was a better, like I said, I dream a genie way to make that go away. And I think you understand it too. I think just maybe that vomit draft, maybe getting that out there, getting in the word, especially in places where it talks about what he did to shame and to guilt and how those have no place in our life. And even like you talked about, okay, if we take the faith component out, there's no good why for us taking that on ourselves. And we're never going to really know the why of our abusers, because they were manipulative or they had been manipulated, like your cousin. Yeah. So we're not going to get that why. And are we going to sit here and stay stalled in this place of unforgiveness for ourselves, unforgiveness for other people, it just creates a bitterness that just literally will physically eat us away. I think there are people who have died carrying around their anger and their unforgiveness. I know my older brother has some health issues because he's not letting go of his. There are
studies that show that if you're having stomach issues, that's related.
Yes. That kind of anxiety causes such an inflammation inside you. And I don't know if there's a one size fits all so much, but I think the best way to feel like we can get there is just what you said. I have found that the moment I get it out, and even if all you're doing is sitting in your living room, and if you believe in God and you want to talk to Jesus about it, hallelujah, he's going to be listening whether you believe in him or not. But just feeling heard that you've gotten it out, finding other people who can help you work that together for good, help you understand that isn't an end, that we're not sitting in a shame cul-de-sac, if you will. You know what I mean? I don't know that it's a one size fits all. But I do know that unless you find the forgiveness that we have received and be able to dole it out, especially to yourself, you're going to stay stuck. Like, our pastor just did this sermon on unforgiveness and anger, and talking about how when a bear gets caught in a bear trap, that the word for unforgiveness and for anger is exactly that it's a trap, and that you can't move into your future if you don't contend with that. And I would venture to guess that every human being you might encounter who does have some shame and who feels unworthy or feels like this is their fault, feels stuck. And so understanding that the forgiveness that's been doled out for us, if we're ready to accept it, is what we need to give to ourselves. I think you can't walk out of that until you do.
Yeah, that's so good. And just, I don't know that, like, sometimes I miss the obvious, and I didn't recognize, like, yes, there's still maybe some unforgiveness for myself, like, where I'm like, it's like the shame attaches to me and I throw it off, and then it, like, there's little, reminders and it comes back or whatever. But that, like, recognizing you can't stay there and being, like, just courageous enough to lean in. And I can't tell you how many things that once I've said it out loud, I realized immediately that that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
I wasn't nodding to agree with that statement.
Like, that makes zero sense. Like, why was I thinking that? It's like, and scripture says, you expose it to the light, like the darkness, you will see it as darkness. I can't remember exactly the scripture, but I know it's in there, and it is true. Like, saying it out loud, exposing it to the light, there's so much power in that. And I love that you said your second book is called Out Loud.
For that exact reason.
Yeah.
Because once we say it out loud, that's the sound of healing.
I don't know if you listened to the episode that I did. Is there a third book yet? Because I have something that I shared in the podcast. I'm like, I've had this written down. I know this is a process that God is walking me through, but I also think it's not just for me, it's for someone else. And the first word is called speak, like it's about speaking up. Second is let it out. Whatever it is, just let it out. And the third is stripped, no longer allowing that to be your identity. Because once you start, like, letting it out, I feel like you can end up in a trap where the enemy, like, keeps you there.
Do you get that the initials are SOS?
No. I never saw
You know
that.
what an SOS is?
Yes.
It's a distress signal.
And the initials of what you just said were SOS.
Yeah.
It's like
I never...
a cry out. I'm sitting in. I'd been in trouble, but I'd thrown up the SOS. It's a little light.
That's a bit in my journal. Like I wrote it down and I'm like, I don't even, like I recognized it as a process. Like one, you do this, then you do this, and then you do this. But I never I didn't know what it meant, but I thought it was like extremely powerful.
Yes.
So anyways, I think that is interesting. I can't wait to get your book. When we're recording, it's October. It's released for the public in November?
November 11th. You can go pre-order it now. So I don't know when we're going to air, but you can
it'll
pre-order
probably be
it
after November 11th. So it'll be out in the world. Yes. Oh, she's so excited to read it. I'm excited to know like there's a second one coming.
Yeah.
And did you say there's a third?
No, I didn't even want to write these two.
I have a feeling there's a third.
Well, if he does, he does. But right now there's two, and the second one has a workbook with it. And I feel he's leading me to do boutique retreats because when you speak to a room full of a couple hundred women, what are you really going to be able to get done? Even like with this podcast, we've covered some really good nuggets and stuff. But if we want to like drill down and really help somebody who's kind of hanging on to some stuff or walk through healing, a friend suggested it. The Lord's kind of reinforced it. I just have to flesh out what it looks like. But I think that's the next step. Maybe not necessarily a book, but being able to help people sit down with the workbook and go forward.
Gotcha. So do you not do one-on-one like stuff now?
No.
No? Okay. Because I think, I can see how that would be beneficial. The boutique retreat is interesting because I was a top leader in the direct selling company 31 for a really long time. I've hosted a ton of retreats. And while it was based on direct selling, that was just the vehicle to get them there. And so in these retreats, the last 2 or 3 was really just about what God wanted to do in these women. And, almost every single one of them, I remember God telling me, like, you're going to ask them to stand up if they have ever been sexually abused or that's happened to one of their children. And I think all but one, like 30 women.
I don't doubt it. I only see 90 out of 100 if I'm in a room of 100, but I think 90's conservative.
Yeah. And so then once I quit 31 and resigned from that, like I've done a couple other retreats and there's so much power. I think I've done 2 or 3 now and it's a lot. It's very heavy work, but the breakthrough that those women experienced and the power, like they left changed forever. And most of it was just about them being willing to say the words they had never said to anybody. Like that deep, dark secret that's been in their closet.
That's exactly what it would be. The friend recommended, they were like, Michele, you are so good this way. He goes, I get it. You're afraid of this. He goes, but I just don't think you can accomplish with a couple hundred people. He goes, you can get them rolling. He goes, but I think you should Airbnb a house that can sleep 5. Go in. He goes, you're a pastry chef and a sous chef. You do the menu. He said, you do physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. He goes, so you have the menu. You're going to have a healthy weekend. We're going to, drill down and not like somebody's going to come out of there again with a one-time, hallelujah healing, but I think some real revelation and some real drill down. So I told him I just had a hard time charging for that. I go, don't want to go in the hole. I go, but how do I charge for that? And he goes, you need to stop that. He goes, if the Lord calls you to do this, he goes, you don't have to make a fortune off of it, but you do need to get yourself paid back for it. And he goes,
I think you pray and ask.
And he said, if people feel like you have value and you're going to bring value to them, he goes, it'll be fine.
It's interesting because you attended the one thing that was in person. What I wrote down, Pathway to Peace.
Oh, yeah. That was a Bible study.
Was it in person?
Yes. There was like 7 of us. It was pretty intense.
Yeah.
It was 8 weeks. In 8 weeks, she was able to wrangle me around.
Imagine if she had you for like 3 days,
Yeah.
a week. The power that could have came so much faster, unless she would have just got up and walked away.
Right. It may have happened because I was able to sit over. I had this one chair in her house that I always took, and it kind of had me tucked in a corner, and I was not doing the talking. I mean, she had to extract, and that's not like me. If I'm in a little group, I can get chatty, but she had her work cut out for her, which was funny because I was probably the one in the room who had been like saved the longest and had a, technically a thriving relationship with Jesus, but yet I was over here holding on to unforgiveness.
Well, I think that's the struggle with a lot of Christians that, like, I don't even know the word, but I know that's a major struggle and something that like God wants to set us free from, but we have to be willing to let him do that work. So,
Yep.
Well, I'm sure that your friend is going to be there soon. I know the time difference is different, but
Yeah, it says 5 minutes, but she's never on time. Now watch her be on time, but whatever.
I just want to say thank you so much for coming on and being willing to share your story. Thank you for doing the work that was necessary to write this book and the second book, because no doubt lives will be like, they're already being changed. There's already lives changed from your story and this work that you've been able to do. And I shared in an interview that I was doing earlier, this image, and I think you're going to really understand it and get it. And that is that shackled people can't free slaves. And there are so many of us who are bound up with all of this stuff. And, as someone who has struggled with that, like not feeling worthy of it, I see it in other people more than I see it in myself.
Absolutely.
And I want to help them, even to my own detriment sometimes. But for me to help them the way God wants me to help them, I need to become free first. And yeah, I can do so. Like, I've done a lot of things without being completely free. And I think sometimes I'm fully free and then I get bound up again because, again, like, we're a mess. But like this idea of like doing the work so that we can become free, so that we can help others who we can clearly see struggling, whether it's our neighbor or our cousin or our best friend, or, we feel called to lead a group at church or work with the youth or, whatever that thing is. Like, man, when we can become free, God can use us in even more powerful ways than what we're trying to do in our own strength, remaining shackled to the shame and the unforgiveness, the bitterness, all of the things. So I think that's a great segue to end of this episode. I appreciate you. I loved getting to know you. I hope we stay in touch. You've been amazing. Hey friend, that's it for this episode. If you found value, I would love it if you could take a couple of seconds and leave me a quick review. While it may seem super simple, it is so beneficial and gives me the opportunity to help more women. Also, take a screenshot and share it on social media with your biggest aha today. Don't forget to tag me at MelissaBadOfficial so we can connect. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, friend, keep walking it out one baby step at a time because God's got you.